The sound of snarling wolves pierced the frigid Montana night, sending Sarah Parker's heart racing as she clutched her shotgun with white knuckles and positioned herself between the advancing pack and her children's cabin. Blood from a minor wound trickled down her arm, but her eyes remained steady, her resolve unwavering even as exhaustion threatened to overtake her. Montana Territory, 1876. The winter had been brutal in Montezuma Valley. Snow piled high against the small wooden cabin that Sarah Parker had built with her late husband, Thomas, 4 years prior. Since his passing from pneumonia last winter, Sarah had managed alone with their 2 children, Emma, age 7, and James, who had just turned 5. They lived a hard but honest life on the edge of civilization, their nearest neighbors being the Wilsons, who lived 3 miles to the east. Tonight, Sarah stood her ground. The wolves had been growing bolder as the winter deepened. Game was scarce and the predators were desperate. She'd heard them howling closer each night, but this was the first time they'd approached the cabin. 6 of them now, their eyes reflecting the faint moonlight as they stalked forward through the snow. "Get back inside now," Sarah hissed to Emma, who had peeked out from the cabin door. "But Mama, inside. Bolt the door and watch your brother." The wolves advanced as Emma reluctantly retreated. Sarah fired a warning shot into the air, hoping to frighten them off, but hunger had made them brave. The alpha, a massive gray beast with a scarred face, snarled and continued its approach. Sarah leveled her shotgun, knowing she had only 1 shell left. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but from the cold. She'd need to make the shot count. The alpha lunged. A rifle shot cracked through the night, dropping the wolf mid-leap. Sarah's head whipped toward the source of the unexpected aid. A figure on horseback emerged from the tree line, rifle raised. The remaining wolves hesitated, caught between their hunger and this new threat. The rider fired again, and another wolf fell. The rest of the pack scattered into the darkness, disappearing as quickly as they had come. "You folks all right?" the man called out, dismounting from his horse with practiced ease. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in a heavy coat with a wide-brimmed hat pulled low over his eyes. "We're fine," Sarah replied warily, keeping her shotgun ready. Strangers weren't always welcome in these parts, especially not at night. "Name's Samuel Keller," he said, approaching slowly with his hands visible. "Was tracking those wolves for the past day. They've been causing trouble for ranchers all through the valley." As he came closer, Sarah could make out his features in the moonlight. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, with a strong jaw shadowed by stubble and kind eyes that seemed at odds with his weathered appearance. "Sarah Parker," she replied, finally lowering her shotgun. "Those are my children inside." Samuel nodded, glancing at the cabin. "You handled yourself well, Mrs. Parker. Most folks would have panicked with a pack that size." "I don't have the luxury of panic, Mr. Keller. Not anymore." Sarah winced suddenly, the adrenaline fading and the pain from the wolf's scratch returning. "You're hurt," he observed, concern evident in his voice. "It's nothing. One of them caught me when I was bringing in firewood earlier. That's what started this whole mess. Might be nothing, might be trouble if it festers. Mind if I take a look?" His tone was professional, not presumptuous. Sarah hesitated, then nodded. "Let me check on my children first." Emma and James were huddled together by the fireplace when Sarah entered, their eyes wide with fear. "It's all right now," she assured them, kneeling to embrace them both. "The wolves are gone. Who was that man?" Emma asked, always observant. "His name is Mr. Keller. He helped chase the wolves away." "Is he staying?" James's voice was small and hopeful. Sarah paused. "Just for a little while. He's going to help me with something, and then he'll be on his way." When she returned outside, Samuel had already retrieved his saddlebags and was tethering his horse to a post. "Beautiful children," he commented, having glimpsed them through the open door. "Thank you," Sarah replied. "Come inside. It's too cold out here." The cabin was modest but well-maintained, with a small kitchen area, a table with 4 chairs, and a sitting area near the fireplace. 2 small beds occupied one corner, while a curtain partitioned off Sarah's sleeping space. Emma and James watched curiously as Samuel removed his hat and coat. He smiled warmly at them, then turned his attention to Sarah's arm. "Let's see to that wound," he said, opening his saddlebag and retrieving a small medical kit. His hands were gentle but confident as he cleaned the scratch, which was deeper than Sarah had realized. "You a doctor, Mr. Keller?" she asked, trying not to wince as he worked. He chuckled. "No, madam, just spent enough time on my own to learn a few things. Served as a medic during the war for a spell." "Which side?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "Union," he replied without hesitation. "Though these days I try not to dwell on sides. War's been over 11 years now." Sarah nodded. Her husband had fought for the Union as well, though he seldom spoke of it before his death. "Mama says you're leaving soon," Emma suddenly piped up, watching Samuel with curious eyes. Samuel glanced at Sarah, then back to the little girl. "That's right, once I'm sure your mama's okay, I'll be moving on. But it's dark and cold," Emma protested, "and the wolves might come back." "Emma," Sarah admonished gently, though the child's words mirrored her own concerns. Samuel finished bandaging Sarah's arm. "Your daughter makes a good point, Mrs. Parker. Those wolves might return, especially if they're as hungry as they seem. I'd be happy to keep watch tonight if you'll allow it." Sarah studied him carefully. There was something trustworthy about his steady gaze and straightforward manner. Still, caution had kept her and her children alive this long. "You can stay in the barn," she decided finally. "There's hay that'll keep you warm enough." Samuel nodded, accepting her terms without complaint. "That'll do fine, thank you." After Samuel had gone to the barn, Sarah settled her children into bed. Emma watched her with thoughtful eyes. "He seems nice, Mama," she whispered. "Yes," Sarah agreed cautiously, "but we don't know him." "Papa would have let him stay in the house," Emma said with the certainty of childhood. Sarah sighed, stroking her daughter's hair. "Perhaps. Now sleep." Later, as Sarah prepared for bed herself, she found her thoughts returning to the stranger in her barn. There had been something in his eyes, a kindness, a depth of understanding that had touched her. It had been a long time since she'd allowed herself to notice such things in a man. She shook the thoughts away. One night, she reminded herself. He'd be gone with the morning light, and life would continue as it had for the past year, just her and her children against the wilderness. But when Sarah awoke to the smell of coffee and the sound of male laughter mingling with her children's, she knew something had already changed. Samuel had risen before dawn, rekindled the fire, and started breakfast. Now he sat at her table, showing James how to whittle a small wooden figure while Emma watched in delight. "Morning, Mrs. Parker," he greeted, standing as she entered. "Hope you don't mind. The little ones were up early and I thought you could use the rest." Sarah should have been annoyed at the presumption, but found she couldn't summon the feeling. "Thank you," she said instead, accepting the cup of coffee he offered. "Mama, look what Mr. Keller made for me." James exclaimed, proudly displaying a small wooden horse. "It's beautiful," Sarah said, genuinely impressed by the craftsmanship. "You're very talented, Mr. Keller, Sam, please," he replied with a smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "And it's just something I picked up over the years." Keeps the hands busy during long nights on the trail. After breakfast, Samuel helped Sarah with the morning chores without being asked. He chopped firewood, repaired a loose board on the porch, and checked the perimeter of the property for any sign of the wolves returning. "Looks like they've moved on," he reported as they finished feeding the livestock, "but they might circle back if they're desperate enough." Sarah nodded, pulling her shawl tighter against the cold. "We've managed this long, we'll be fine." Samuel studied her face. "No doubt about that, madam. You're clearly capable, but everyone needs help sometimes." "Are you offering, Mr. Keller?" The question came out more challenging than she'd intended. "I suppose I am," he replied, unfazed by her tone. "I was heading to Billings to find work for the winter, but I'm in no particular hurry. I could stay a few days, help secure things around here, maybe hunt down the rest of that wolf pack before they cause more trouble." Sarah wanted to refuse. Accepting help felt like admitting weakness, and weakness was something she couldn't afford. But the practical part of her, the part focused on her children's safety, knew better. "3 days," she said finally. "I can offer you meals and a place to sleep in return." Samuel smiled, tipping his hat. "That's more than fair." The children were delighted when Sarah announced that Mr. Keller would be staying. James immediately enlisted his help in building a snow fort, while Emma peppered him with questions about his travels. That evening, as the children slept, Sarah and Samuel sat by the fire. She mended clothes while he cleaned his rifle, the comfortable silence occasionally broken by the crackling of the flames. "You've done well by them," Samuel said suddenly, nodding toward the sleeping children. "Can't be easy out here on your own." Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. "We manage." "That you do," he agreed. "Most women would have headed back east after losing their husband. Takes courage to stay." "Not courage," Sarah corrected, resuming her sewing. "Necessity. This land is all we have. Thomas and I put everything into it. How long were you married?" 8 years. "We came out here right after the war ended. Thomas had a dream of building something that was truly ours." She smiled sadly. "He always had big dreams." "Sounds like a good man." "He was." Sarah set aside her mending. "What about you, Mr. Keller? No wife waiting somewhere?" Samuel shook his head. "Never found the time, I guess. After the war, I drifted, worked ranches from Texas to Montana, never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots." "And now," Sarah found herself genuinely curious. He considered the question. "Now I'm starting to think maybe roots wouldn't be so bad." Their eyes met briefly across the fire, and Sarah felt a flicker of something she hadn't experienced in a long time. She looked away quickly, standing to bank the fire for the night. "It's late," she said, suddenly brisk. "You can take the bedroll by the fire." Samuel nodded, understanding her retreat. "Thank you, Mrs. Parker. Sleep well." The next 3 days passed in a rhythm that felt surprisingly natural. Samuel rose early each morning, joined Sarah in the chores, spent time with the children, and in the afternoons ventured out to track the wolf pack. He returned each evening with game for the table and reports on the wolves' movements. On the second day, he brought down a deer, providing enough meat to last Sarah and the children for weeks. Together, they butchered and preserved it, working side by side in a companionable silence that Sarah found oddly comforting. The children grew more attached to him by the hour. James followed him like a shadow, soaking up every bit of knowledge Samuel shared about tracking, hunting, and surviving in the wilderness. Emma, more reserved initially, gradually opened up, showing him her drawings and the small garden she maintained even in winter using the cold frame her father had built. On the evening of the third day, Samuel was meant to leave a blizzard blew in unexpectedly. The wind howled around the cabin, snow accumulating rapidly against the walls. "No one should be traveling in this," Sarah said, watching the storm through the window. "You'll have to stay until it passes." Was that relief she felt at the excuse to extend his stay? Sarah pushed the thought aside. "If you're sure," Samuel replied, though they both knew there was no alternative. The blizzard lasted 3 days, sealing them inside the cabin together. They passed the time with stories, games with the children, and practical tasks. Samuel taught Emma to whittle, while Sarah showed James how to make biscuits. In the evenings, after the children were asleep, they talked about their lives, their hopes, and the paths that had led them to this place. Sarah learned that Samuel had grown up in Ohio, the son of a blacksmith. He'd enlisted in the Union Army at 18, served for the duration of the war, and returned home to find his parents had died from influenza while he was away. With nothing to keep him there, he'd headed west, working wherever he could find employment. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Pennsylvania, her courtship with Thomas, and their decision to seek a new life in Montana territory. She spoke of the difficult early years, the joy of her children's births, and the devastating loss of her husband. "I was angry for a long time," she admitted one night, her voice low. "At God, at Thomas for leaving us, at myself for not being able to save him. But anger doesn't keep you warm at night or put food on the table." "No," Samuel agreed, his eyes reflecting the firelight, "but it can keep you going until you find something better to live for." When Sarah looked at him, she saw understanding rather than pity. It was that, perhaps more than anything else, that began to lower the walls she'd built around her heart. On the fourth morning, they woke to find the storm had finally passed, leaving a pristine white landscape and crystal-clear skies. Samuel went outside to assess the damage and clear paths to the barn and outhouse. Sarah watched him through the window, his strong figure moving efficiently through the deep snow. "Is Mr. Keller leaving today?" Emma asked, coming to stand beside her mother. Sarah hesitated. "I suppose he might." "The weather's clear now. I don't want him to go, James declared, looking up from his wooden horse. Can't he stay forever, James? Sarah admonished gently. Mr. Keller has his own life to get back to. But when Samuel returned, stomping snow from his boots, he made no mention of leaving. Instead, he announced, I found fresh wolf tracks not far from the barn. They're getting bold again. Sarah's heart sank. How many? 4, maybe 5, different pack than before, I think. This winter's driving them all closer to settlements. He hung his coat by the door. I think I should stay a while longer if that's all right with you, at least until I can track down this new pack. Relief flooded through Sarah, though she tried not to show it. If you think that's necessary. I do, he said simply. That afternoon, Samuel took his rifle and headed out to track the wolves. Sarah tried to focus on her usual tasks, but found herself repeatedly glancing out the window, watching for his return. The children were unusually quiet, sensing her anxiety. When dusk began to fall with no sign of him, Sarah's worry deepened. She was about to bundle up and look for him herself when she heard the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Rushing to the window, she saw Samuel riding toward the cabin, something large strapped across the back of his horse. Got the alpha, he announced triumphantly as he dismounted. The massive wolf's body was secured behind his saddle. The rest scattered. They won't be back any time soon. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. You're hurt, she observed, noticing the blood on his sleeve. Just a scratch, he echoed her words from their first meeting with a smile. One of them got a bit too close. Inside, Sarah insisted on tending to his wound just as he had done for her. As she cleaned the cut on his forearm, deeper than he'd admitted, but not serious, she was acutely aware of his gaze on her face, of the warmth of his skin beneath her fingers. Thank you, he said softly when she finished. It seems I'm the one who should be thanking you, Sarah replied, not meeting his eyes. You've done so much for us, Sarah. The use of her first name made her look up. His expression was serious intent. I'm not staying because I feel obligated. I hope you know that. She swallowed hard. Why are you staying then? Before he could answer, Emma called from the other room, breaking the moment. Samuel smiled ruefully and stood up. Perhaps that's a conversation for another time. Another time came sooner than Sarah expected. That night, after the children were asleep, Samuel joined her by the fire as had become their custom. But instead of taking his usual seat across from her, he sat beside her on the small bench. You asked me earlier why I'm staying, he began, his voice low. The truth is, I haven't felt this. Settled in years, maybe ever. He looked at her directly. It's not just the place, Sarah, it's you and those children, Sarah's heart pounded. Samuel, I know it's sudden, he continued, and I know you have every reason to be cautious. But I think there could be something here, between us, if you're willing to see where it leads. Sarah looked down at her hands, twisted together in her lap. It's been just over a year since Thomas died. I never thought I'd. She trailed off, unsure how to express the turmoil of emotions inside her. I'm not asking for promises, Samuel said gently. Just time to get to know each other better, time for you to be sure of what you want. When she finally looked up at him, his eyes were warm with understanding. I can give you time, she whispered. He reached out slowly, giving her the chance to pull away, and when she didn't, he took her hand in his. The simple contact sent a surge of warmth through her that had nothing to do with the nearby fire. In the weeks that followed, Samuel became an integral part of their small household. He repaired the roof damaged in the blizzard, built new shelves in the kitchen, and constructed a sledge to make it easier for Sarah to transport supplies from town. Together, they expanded the chicken coop and reinforced the barn against predators. With each passing day, Sarah found herself opening up more, laughing more. The weight of grief and solitude that had pressed down on her for so long began to lift. She caught herself watching him as he worked, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the gentleness in his hands when he helped Emma with her reading or lifted James onto the back of his horse for a short ride around the property. The children flourished under his attention. James, especially, seemed to stand taller, eager to learn the skills Samuel patiently taught him. Emma, initially more reserved, gradually came to trust him, eventually sharing the special hiding place where she kept her mother's hairbrush and her father's pocket watch treasures she had previously shown to no one. One evening in late February, Samuel brought up the subject of his future plans. "Spring will be here before we know it," he said as they sat together after the children were asleep. "Time to start thinking about planting." Sarah nodded, trying to ignore the tightness in her chest at the implied question about his plans. "The garden needs to be expanded this year. We barely had enough vegetables to get through winter." "I was thinking the same," Samuel agreed, "and maybe it's time to consider getting a milk cow. Growing children need milk." Sarah looked at him in surprise. "A cow is a significant investment. I've been saving from odd jobs," he said. "And I thought maybe," he paused, seeming uncharacteristically nervous. "I thought maybe if I was planning to stay, it would be a worthwhile investment." "Stay," Sarah repeated, her heart beating faster. Samuel shifted to face her more directly. "Sarah, I need to know if there's a place for me here, not just as a hired hand or a friendly neighbor, but as—" He took a deep breath, "as something more." Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. "The children would be devastated if you left," she said softly. "And you." His voice was gentle but insistent. "I would be devastated too," she admitted, finally giving voice to feelings she'd been harboring for weeks. "I never expected to feel this way again, Samuel. It frightens me sometimes." "Why?" he asked, taking her hands in his. "Because I've already lost one husband. I'm not sure I could bear losing another." Samuel's expression softened. He reached up to brush a tear from her cheek. "None of us knows what tomorrow brings, Sarah, but I do know that I love you. I love your children. And I want to build a life with you, for as long as we're given." The sincerity in his eyes broke down the last of her resistance. Sarah leaned forward, and for the first time since Thomas died, allowed herself to be kissed by another man. Samuel's lips were warm and gentle against hers, his hand coming up to cradle her face as if she were something infinitely precious. When they parted, Sarah rested her forehead against his. "Stay," she whispered. "Please stay." His smile lit up his entire face. "Wild horses couldn't drag me away." The next morning, they shared their decision with the children over breakfast. James whooped with excitement, while Emma's reaction was more measured, though her eyes shone with happiness. "Does this mean you'll be our papa now?" James asked bluntly. Samuel exchanged a look with Sarah before answering carefully. "Not right away, buddy. Your mama and I need some time to get to know each other better, but someday, if everyone agrees, that's what I'd like." "I'd like that too," Emma said quietly, surprising them all. "Dad would want Mama to be happy." Sarah blinked back tears and reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Thank you, sweetheart." As winter gave way to spring, Sarah and Samuel fell into a comfortable partnership. They worked side by side preparing the fields and garden, repairing winter damage to the property, and caring for the animals, including the new milk cow Samuel purchased from a ranch 10 miles away. Their evenings were spent planning for the future, discussing which crops to plant, debating the merits of expanding the cabin versus building a larger home, and sometimes simply dreaming about the years ahead. After the children were asleep, they would often sit together on the porch, watching the stars and sharing soft kisses that grew increasingly passionate as their relationship deepened. By April, when the wildflowers began to carpet the valley, Samuel broached the subject that had been on both their minds. "I think it's time we made this official," he said as they walked together along the creek that bordered their property. He stopped, taking both her hands in his. "Sarah Parker, will you marry me?" Though she had been expecting the question, Sarah found herself momentarily speechless. The man before her, this kind, strong, patient man who had stepped into their lives on a snowy night and transformed them completely, was offering her a second chance at happiness. "Yes," she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. "Yes, I will marry you, Samuel Keller." His face broke into a radiant smile as he pulled her into his arms. Their kiss was a promise, a celebration, a beginning. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in Montezuma. The entire community turned out, curious about the stranger who had won the heart of the widow Parker. Reverend Johnson officiated. Emma served as her mother's attendant, proudly holding a bouquet of spring flowers, and James solemnly carried the rings on a small pillow he insisted on making himself. That evening, after a celebration at the Wilsons' farm and putting 2 exhausted children to bed, Sarah and Samuel stood alone on the porch of what was now their home. "Mrs. Keller," Samuel said softly, drawing her into his arms, "has a nice ring to it, don't you think?" Sarah smiled up at him. "I'm getting used to it." He brushed a strand of hair from her face. "I meant what I said in my vows today. I will spend every day trying to make you and those children happy." "You already have," she replied, resting her head against his chest. "You gave us hope again." Later, as they lay together in the privacy of their bedroom, Sarah marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the terror of that wolf attack to the safety of Samuel's arms, it seemed both an eternity and the blink of an eye. "What are you thinking?" Samuel asked, tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "That sometimes the worst moments of our lives can lead us to the best," she answered honestly. "If those wolves hadn't come that night," he pulled her closer. "I like to think we would have found each other anyway. Some things are just meant to be." As spring turned to summer, their life together flourished like the crops in their fields. Samuel proved to be as skilled a farmer as he was a hunter, introducing new techniques he'd learned during his travels. Under his guidance, they planted not just the usual vegetables, but also wheat and corn in the larger fields. Sarah watched with joy as her children bonded ever more deeply with their new father. Samuel taught James to ride properly, spending hours patiently instructing the boy on handling the gentle mare he'd purchased specifically for this purpose. With Emma, he shared his love of books, often riding into town to borrow new volumes from the small lending library that had recently opened. In August, as they celebrated James's 6th birthday, Sarah shared news of her own. "I have a special gift for all of you," she announced after James had opened his presents, a carved wooden soldier from Samuel and a hand-knitted scarf from Emma. "Something that won't arrive until winter." Samuel looked at her questioningly, then understanding dawned in his eyes. "Sarah, are you?" She nodded, a smile spreading across her face. "We're going to have a baby." The children's reactions were priceless, Emma clasping her hands in delight, James asking practical questions about where exactly the baby would sleep. But it was Samuel's response that Sarah treasured most. Wordlessly, he crossed to her, dropped to his knees, and pressed his face against her still flat stomach, his shoulders shaking with emotion. "Thank you," he whispered when he finally looked up at her, tears in his eyes. "For everything." The pregnancy progressed smoothly through the fall harvest, which was abundant beyond their expectations. They sold the surplus in town, earning enough to purchase additional supplies for the winter and to begin setting aside funds for the larger home they now definitely needed. November brought the first snows, and with them, a letter from Samuel's former commanding officer from the war, now a successful businessman in Helena. He offered Samuel a partnership in a new venture, a stagecoach line that would connect the growing settlements throughout Montana territory. "It would mean some travel," Samuel explained as they discussed the opportunity. "But the pay would be substantial. We could build that new house sooner, maybe even hire help for the farm." Sarah considered the proposal carefully. "Do you want to do it?" "Only if you're comfortable with it," he replied. "You and the children come first." After much discussion, they agreed that Samuel would accept the position but limit his travel until after the baby was born. His first trip to Helena was scheduled for early December, with plans to return well before Christmas. The day of his departure was difficult for all of them. Emma and James clung to him, extracting multiple promises that he would return with stories and perhaps small gifts from the territorial capital. Sarah held her emotions in check until the children had gone to do their chores, then allowed herself to be enfolded in his embrace. 3 weeks, Samuel promised, his lips against her hair, not a day longer. "We'll be fine," Sarah assured him, though her heart was heavy. "Just come back to us safely." As his figure disappeared down the snow-covered road, Sarah placed a protective hand over her growing belly. "Your papa will be back soon," she whispered to the child within. The days of Samuel's absence passed slowly. Sarah kept herself and the children busy with preparations for Christmas and the baby, sewing tiny garments in the evenings and helping Emma bake cookies from her grandmother's recipe. James appointed himself the man of the house, insisting on taking over some of Samuel's chores despite his small size. 2 weeks into Samuel's trip, another blizzard struck. For 3 days, the wind howled around the cabin, rattling the windows and piling snow against the doors. Sarah fought down her worry, reminding herself and the children that Samuel was safely in Helena, waiting out the storm before beginning his journey home. When the storm finally cleared, Sarah was relieved to see that the damage was minimal: a few loose shingles, a branch down near the barn. As she and the children worked to clear paths to the outbuildings, Emma suddenly pointed toward the road. "Riders coming, Mama." Sarah shaded her eyes against the bright snow, her heart leaping at the thought that Samuel might be returning. But as the figures drew closer, she realized it wasn't her husband but two strangers bundled against the cold. "Stay here," she instructed the children, heading inside to retrieve the shotgun, a precaution she still maintained despite the relative safety they'd enjoyed over the past year. The riders stopped at a respectful distance from the house. "Mrs. Keller," called the older of the two, a gray-haired man with a weathered face. "Yes," Sarah replied cautiously, the shotgun visible but not aimed. "Name's Frank Miller. This is my son, George. We work for the Montana Stage Company." The man removed his hat despite the cold. "I'm afraid I have news about your husband." Sarah's blood ran cold. "What about him?" "There was an accident, madam. Stage lost control on the mountain pass during the storm, went over the edge." The world seemed to tilt beneath Sarah's feet. "Is he?" She couldn't finish the question. "He's alive," Frank said quickly, seeing her distress, "but hurt bad. They took him to Dr. Watson's place in Fort Benton, closest doctor to the accident site." Relief warred with fresh worry. "How badly is he hurt?" "Broken leg, some ribs too, I think." "Hit his head pretty hard. Doc's taking good care of him, but he can't be moved yet. Asked us to come tell you, make sure you and the young uns were all right." Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to gather her thoughts. Fort Benton was nearly 100 miles away, an impossible journey in winter conditions, especially in her condition. "I need to go to him," she said finally. Frank shook his head. "Begging your pardon, madam, but that's not possible right now. Roads are barely passable for experienced riders. And in your condition." His eyes flicked briefly to her obvious pregnancy. Sarah knew he was right, but the thought of Samuel lying injured so far away was unbearable. "When can he come home?" "Doc says maybe 2-3 weeks. Depends on how he heals." Frank hesitated. "There's something else, madam. Your husband asked us to give you this." He extended an envelope. With trembling fingers, Sarah took it. "Thank you for bringing this news. Will you come inside, warm yourselves before you continue?" The men accepted gratefully. While they thawed by the fire and Emma served them coffee, Sarah retreated to her bedroom to read Samuel's letter in private. "My dearest Sarah, if you're reading this, Frank and George have reached you safely. First, know that I am alive and will recover fully, according to the doctor. The accident was violent. 4 passengers lost their lives, but I was thrown clear before the stage went over completely. My injuries are painful but not life-threatening. A broken leg in 2 places, 3 cracked ribs, and a concussion that has left me with headaches. Doctor. Watson is competent and kind, assuring me that with proper rest, I will heal completely. What pains me most is being away from you and our children at Christmas, and knowing the worry this will cause you. Please tell Emma and James that I am thinking of them constantly and that I will make it up to them when I return. As for you, my love, take care of yourself and our child. Do not attempt the journey to Fort Benton. The roads are treacherous, and I could not bear it if anything happened to you. I will return to you as soon as Dr. Watson declares me fit for travel. In the meantime, I've asked Frank to arrange for regular deliveries of supplies to you. Accept this help, Sarah. It is no reflection on your capability, which I admire more than I can say, but simply what any husband would do for his family. I love you more than words can express. The thought of you and our children is what sustains me through the pain. Keep faith, my darling. I will be home to you soon. All my love." Samuel. Tears streamed down Sarah's face as she read his words. The letter was so like him, concerned for her welfare even while he lay injured, practical in arranging for their needs, and unfailingly loving. When she emerged from the bedroom, Frank and George were preparing to leave. "Mr. Miller," she called, her voice steadier now. When you return to Fort Benton, please tell my husband that we are well, that we love him, and that we will be waiting for him no matter how long it takes." Frank nodded solemnly. "Yes, madam, and don't you worry about supplies." Company feels responsible, seeing as how he was injured on company business. "We'll make sure you have everything you need." True to their word, the stage company sent weekly deliveries of supplies: flour, sugar, coffee, dried fruits, and other necessities that saved Sarah from having to make the difficult journey to town. The Wilsons and other neighbors also pitched in, checking on them regularly and helping with chores that were becoming increasingly difficult for Sarah as her pregnancy advanced. Christmas came and went, a subdued affair without Samuel. The children hung their stockings and opened the presents Sarah had prepared, but the absence of their stepfather cast a shadow over the day. That night, after the children were asleep, Sarah sat alone by the fire, rereading Samuel's letter and allowing herself to feel the full weight of her worry. January brought more snow and finally, word from Samuel himself. His letter, delivered by a company rider, was longer and more detailed than the first, describing his improving health and his hope to return by early February. His handwriting was shaky but determined, like the man himself. As promised, in the first week of February, a company wagon delivered Samuel home. Sarah and the children rushed out to meet it, unmindful of the cold, as two men helped Samuel down. He was thinner, paler, and leaning heavily on a crutch, but his smile at the sight of them was as bright as ever. "Papa," James cried, running forward but stopping short, uncertain whether he could hug his stepfather without hurting him. "Come here, buddy," Samuel said, balancing on his good leg to open his free arm. James needed no further invitation, flinging himself against Samuel's side while Emma approached more cautiously, tears of joy streaming down her face. When the children finally stepped back, Samuel's gaze found Sarah, taking in her advanced pregnancy with evident emotion. "You're more beautiful than I remembered," he said softly. Sarah moved forward then, carefully embracing him, mindful of his still healing ribs. "Welcome home," she whispered against his neck. That night, after settling Samuel comfortably in their bed and checking that the children were asleep, Sarah finally allowed herself to express the fears that had haunted her during his absence. "I thought I'd lost you," she admitted, her voice breaking as she lay beside him, her head on his shoulder. "When those men rode up before they told me you were alive." Samuel stroked her hair gently. "I know, I'm so sorry for putting you through that." "It wasn't your fault," Sarah said, placing his hand on her belly where the baby kicked vigorously. "Someone else wants to welcome you home." His expression of wonder as he felt their child move was something Sarah knew she would remember forever. "Strong," he commented, "like his mother." "Or her father," Sarah countered with a smile. Samuel's recovery progressed steadily through February. Though he couldn't yet perform heavy labor, he found ways to contribute, keeping the books for their farm, teaching James arithmetic, and reading to Emma. The forced inactivity was clearly frustrating for him, but he bore it with characteristic patience, focusing instead on his gratitude for being home with his family. On a mild day in early March, with the first hints of spring in the air, Sarah went into labor. The midwife from town arrived promptly, ushering Samuel and the children out of the bedroom with firm instructions to keep the fire stoked and water boiling. The labor was long but uncomplicated. As dawn broke the following day, Sarah gave birth to a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's strong features. When Samuel was finally allowed into the room, his face registered awe as Sarah placed their son in his arms. "He's perfect," Samuel whispered, tears filling his eyes as he gently touched the baby's tiny fingers. "What shall we name him?" They had discussed names during the long winter evenings but had never quite decided. Now, looking at her husband cradling their child, Sarah knew. "William," she said. "After your father." Samuel looked at her in surprise. "Are you sure?" Sarah nodded. "William Thomas Keller, to honor both our pasts as we build our future." Samuel's smile was radiant as he leaned down to kiss her. "I love you, Sarah Keller." "And I love you," she replied, her heart full to bursting. "All of this, our family, our home, our life together, began because you found me that night, fighting to protect my children. And I'll never leave your side." Samuel promised, sitting carefully on the edge of the bed so that all three of them were connected. Not ever. Emma and James were permitted to enter then, their eyes wide with wonder as they met their baby brother. James immediately declared his intention to teach William everything Samuel had taught him, while Emma solemnly promised to help care for the infant and to read him stories every day. As Sarah watched her complete family gathered around her bed, she marveled at how life could change in a single moment. That night of terror, with wolves closing in and her children in danger, had seemed like the darkest of times. Yet it had brought Samuel into their lives, and with him, a love and happiness greater than she had dared to hope for. Outside, the snow was melting, revealing the first green shoots of spring. Inside, in the warmth of their cabin, a new life was beginning not just for baby William, but for all of them. 5 years later, the summer sun beat down on the prosperous Keller farm as Sarah hung laundry on the line, pausing occasionally to wipe sweat from her brow. From her vantage point, she could see Samuel in the north field, teaching 10-year-old James to drive the team of horses pulling the hay wagon. Emma, now 12 and growing more beautiful by the day, sat under the large oak tree near the garden, reading to 5-year-old William and 2-year-old Charlotte. The new farmhouse, completed 3 years earlier, stood proud on the rise overlooking their expanded property. With 4 bedrooms, a spacious kitchen, and a covered porch that wrapped around 3 sides, it was everything they had dreamed of during those early days together. The original cabin still stood, converted now into a bunkhouse for the 2 hired hands who helped with the increasing workload of their thriving farm. Samuel's partnership with the stage company had proven lucrative, though after his accident, he had transitioned to a role that required less travel overseeing operations for the Montezuma region from their home. This arrangement allowed him to be present for his growing family while still providing additional income beyond what the farm generated. Sarah smiled as she watched William break away from his sister's story hour and race toward his father and older brother, his little legs pumping furiously. Samuel spotted him, handed the reins to James, and dismounted to scoop the boy into his arms, tossing him high in the air to peals of delighted laughter. These moments, ordinary, everyday moments of family life, were what Sarah treasured most. The laughter of her children, the sight of her husband returning from the fields, the quiet evenings on the porch watching the sunset, these were the riches that filled her heart. Later that evening, after the children were asleep and the house had settled into nighttime stillness, Sarah and Samuel sat together on the porch swing, his arm around her shoulders as they gazed at the star-filled sky. "Penny for your thoughts," Samuel said, pressing a kiss to her temple. Sarah leaned into him, savoring his solid presence beside her. "I was just thinking about how far we've come, from that night with the wolves to all of this." Samuel's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of long married love. "I remember every detail of that night, you know, the way you stood your ground, shotgun ready, protecting your children with everything you had. I think I fell in love with you in that moment, though I didn't realize it then. And I thought you were a madman," Sarah laughed softly. "Charging into a wolf pack in the middle of the night. Best madness I ever gave into," Samuel replied, his voice warm with affection, "bringing me to you, to our family." Sarah turned to face him, studying the beloved features that had become so familiar over the years, the crinkles at the corners of his eyes deepened by sun and laughter, the strong jaw now bearing a few strands of silver in his beard, the steady gaze that still made her heart beat faster. "Thank you," she said simply. "For what? For joining the fight that night, for never leaving my side, for loving me and my children as your own, for giving me William and Charlotte." She touched his face gently. "For everything." Samuel captured her hand, turning it to place a kiss in her palm. "I'm the one who should be thanking you. You gave me a home, Sarah, not just a place to live, but a real home." As the night deepened around them, Sarah rested her head on Samuel's shoulder, content in the knowledge that the love they had found amid danger and fear had grown into something enduring and unshakable, a love that had transformed them both and created a legacy that would live on in their children and beyond. The wolves that had once threatened everything Sarah held dear had unwittingly led her to the greatest blessing of her life. A love brave enough to face any danger, strong enough to weather any storm, and true enough to last a lifetime. And Samuel, the cowboy who had ridden to her rescue on that snowy Montana night, had kept his promise. He had never left her side, and never would.